So remind me, how many of these women did they say DNA linked you to?
They said all of them. No, I don't believe in the science of DNA. It shouldn't have never been enough.
The chance of the DNA being anyone else other than your DNA is a 1 in 18 quadrillion.
This is what people just throw out numbers to make things look bad. No, I don't believe in the science of DNA. It's in the eye of the beholder.
Well, I guess he's convinced himself. Seems like Lorenzo has convinced himself that, you know, DNA is some type of voodoo science. That's ludicrous. And it's just a man looking for something to say. He doesn't have to believe in it, but it's the science that put him, it got him convicted. That's just shameful because the DNA evidence that convicted him would have been the same DNA evidence that would have gotten him out if he...
6 women. Strangled. Dumped in alleys. 1 man accused. But what if they got it wrong? He had no violent past. No witness ever saw him with the victims. But DNA said he did it. The media painted him as a monster. The court called him a serial killer. But behind closed doors, evidence was mishandled, stories changed, and one fact was buried: some of the murders happened while he wasn't even there. Whisper sound, he's still out there. Was Lorenzo Gilyard guilty? Or was he the easiest man to blame? Kansas City, late 1970s to early 80s. A city of bustling strip malls, freeways slicing through neighborhoods, and under the neon glow of 12th Street's music scene, a growing darkness was ignored. Crime was up. Racial tension simmered. City leaders were under pressure to show results. Then, women, mostly black, often involved in sex work, began turning up strangled in alleys, abandoned buildings, or behind dumpsters. Victims like Stacy Swafford and Gwendolyn Kazim disappeared without fanfare. Their bodies would be found days later in places where few people looked. And just like that, panic set in. The news media seized on the story. The Kansas City Strangler was at work, leaving bodies with no warning, no pattern visible to police. All left in shadows, discarded like trash. No warning. No mercy. Just fear that could be felt in every empty street corner and bus stop after dark. Asterisk. They called them prostitutes. Runaways. Drug addicts. The system called them disposable. But they were daughters. Sisters. Mothers. Friends. Stacy Swafford was 17. Bright, funny, with dreams of becoming a nurse. She left home after an argument with her stepfather. A week later, her body was found face down in a field. No shoes. Strangled. No suspects. Gwendolyn Kazim was 15. A sophomore in high school. She loved basketball and wanted to join the military. One afternoon, she disappeared walking home. Her body was found a few days later in a drainage ditch. Margaret Miller. Age 22. Worked 2 jobs and supported her younger siblings. She was last seen leaving her shift at a diner. Her body turned up behind an abandoned warehouse 2 miles away. And there were others, too many others. Michelle. Tammy. Valerie. Their names lost in case files. Their faces blurred in black and white newspapers. To the public, they were just entries on a police blotter. Police reports labeled them as transient, high risk, unstable. Code words. Words that mean, don't look too hard. Don't try too long. Don't care too much. But these women weren't invisible. They lived full lives. Some had children. Most had people who loved them. But when they went missing, their disappearances barely made the news. And when their bodies were found, many didn't even get funerals. In Kansas City, the message was clear: Some lives mattered more than others. Families begged for answers. Held on to hope. Waited for calls from the police that never came. Some stood outside police stations with photos. Others paid for flyers themselves. No one came to help. It wasn't until the bodies kept piling up that the city could no longer look away. When the sixth woman turned up dead, when the headlines finally used the words "serial killer," panic started to spread. But it didn't come from empathy. It came from fear. The public didn't weep for the women. They feared they might be next. And when the media finally spoke, it was clinical. Cold. Another body found, victim believed to be a prostitute. No names. No dignity. Just the same empty words. As fear took over Kansas City, the killer remained a ghost. Bodies kept appearing, each one bearing signs of strangulation, trauma, and heartbreak. But the pattern, if there was one, refused to reveal itself. Police were overwhelmed. Desperate. They opened files from over a decade, dusted off long-forgotten evidence, and called in forensic specialists. One by one, cold cases began to thaw under the glow of ultraviolet light. Then came the breakthrough. Deep in the backlog of samples and slides, DNA started to speak. It was faint, sometimes partial, sometimes incomplete, but it whispered the same name more than once. The blood of one victim matched a partial strand found on another. Then another. Not every crime scene told the same story, but the connections were too strong to ignore. The hunt was on. More than 700 suspects were interviewed, names pulled from criminal databases, neighborhood rumors, even old case files where violent men once walked free. Known offenders were rounded up. Mugshots were tacked to boards. Red strings connected crime scenes to faces, places, theories. But for every door police knocked on, the killer slipped one step further away. Then came an unexpected lead. Subtle, quiet, almost a whisper, a local man named Lorenzo Gilyard. He was no monster on the surface. A clean record. A job. A family. A face that never raised suspicion. But his job, that was different. Gilyard was a garbage truck supervisor. He traveled across the city, every week, every alley, every block. The very same areas where victims were found. He didn't live in the shadows. He moved through them. That tip sent detectives back into the evidence. His name didn't appear on any early witness lists. No one recalled seeing him with a victim. But the DNA, it kept circling back. April 2004. The streets of Kansas City were just beginning to forget. The headlines had quieted. Mothers still lit candles, but the urgency had faded. Then, without warning, it happened. Lorenzo Gillyard was arrested. To those who knew him, it felt impossible. This was a man who clocked in on time. Who smiled at neighbors. Who walked with a straight back and never raised his voice. But behind that mask, something else had been hiding. DNA from at least 6 crime scenes matched his profile. The strands had waited decades in silence, now, they pointed their finger. He was charged with killing 6 women. But investigators quietly believed there were more. Some said 13. Others feared the real number would never be known. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No confessions. Just microscopic threads. That was enough to shatter the image of the quiet man in uniform. His home was searched. Neighbors stood in stunned silence as police marked off his property. The man they shared coffee with. The man who waved from his garbage truck. That man was now accused of being a serial killer. From the moment he was arrested, Gilyard proclaimed his innocence. To the press. To his family. To the court. He said the evidence was wrong. He said someone else was responsible. But for prosecutors, the DNA was too strong. The past too bloody. The community needed someone to blame. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, families, police officers, all watching a man who'd lived in their neighborhoods, driven past their children, now sitting in shackles. Lorenzo Gilyard was charged with the murders of 6 women. Each had been strangled. Each discarded like they didn't matter. But now, they did. Because now, someone was finally on trial. But almost immediately, cracks began to show. There were no fingerprints. No eyewitnesses. No confession. No murder weapon. The prosecution's entire case relied on a trail of DNA, some partial, some questionable, and all decades old. Gilyard's defense argued that the DNA evidence was unreliable. That contamination or sloppy preservation could have led to false matches. And they had a point, many of the original samples had sat for decades in outdated storage conditions. They also claimed the police had tunnel vision. That once Gilyard's name entered the system, every piece of evidence was reinterpreted through the lens of guilt. But prosecutors had a different narrative. He was meticulous. He left no fingerprints because he planned it that way. He blended into society because that's what predators do. It became a war of stories, science versus doubt. Evidence versus instinct. And behind every argument, the grieving families, watching, waiting. And not everyone believed he was guilty. In the back rows of the courtroom, quiet conversations stirred. He doesn't look like a killer. Maybe they just needed someone to blame. Some family members of other victims, those whose cases were never linked to Gilyard, spoke out too. They believed the real killer was still out there. That this trial was just theater. In the end, the jury took less than 2 days to decide. Guilty. On all counts. Life in prison. No parole. Some applauded. Others stared at the floor. Gilyard showed no emotion. But the verdict didn't bring peace, it brought more questions. If he was truly guilty, why did some of the murders continue after his arrest? Why did his DNA only match some of the scenes, but not others? And why, after all these years, does part of the city still whisper that they got the wrong man? The trial was over. Lorenzo Gilyard was locked away. And the headlines had moved on. But in Kansas City, something didn't feel finished. There were too many loose ends. Too many contradictions. Too many unanswered questions. Some of the murders, the ones police had long associated with the same killer, had no connection to Gilyard at all, not through DNA, not through timeline, not even through proximity. And worse, some happened after Gilyard was already behind bars. Could there have been another killer? A copycat? Or had law enforcement simply pinned everything they could on the one man who fit the narrative? For the families of victims whose cases were never officially tied to Gilyard, the pain didn't go away, it got worse. They weren't even offered a false sense of closure. They were offered silence. Some began their own investigations. Others begged police to reopen files. But after the trial, the urgency vanished. And justice faded with it. Even the DNA, the so-called smoking gun, was questioned in hindsight. Partial matches. Aged samples. Broken chains of custody. For every expert that claimed it proved guilt, another argued it proved nothing at all. And still, behind all of this, the same question hung in the air like a ghost that wouldn't leave. In 2019, more than 15 years after Lorenzo Gilyard was sent away, a quiet announcement sent a ripple through the city. The police had reopened multiple cold cases. No press conference. No flashy headlines. Just a line in a document that many missed. Based on new methods and unresolved discrepancies, several homicide cases are being re-examined. They didn't say why. But those who had followed the story closely knew what it meant. There were doubts. Maybe there had always been. Even in prison, Gilyard never confessed. Not once. No remorse. No breakdown. Just one quiet, constant line, I'm not guilty. Some say that's what all monsters do, deny, until the end. Others aren't so sure. Because the truth is, the DNA matched only a handful of victims. The rest? Still unexplained. Still unanswered. And still dead. So if Lorenzo Gilyard wasn't responsible for all of it, who was? Was he a partial predator, or a convenient fall guy? Was the city hunting one killer, or shielding something darker? Years have passed, but for many, closure never came. Lorenzo Gilyard's name is etched in courtroom transcripts, but justice remains a ghost for dozens of families. We may never know how many lives were truly lost. Or if the real killer ever saw a day behind bars. In Kansas City, the silence speaks louder than words. And in neighborhoods across America, women still vanish without a trace, forgotten by the system before they're even reported missing. Was Lorenzo Gilyard a serial predator, or a scapegoat buried under decades of indifference? Let us know what you think. Drop your theory in the comments. Was justice served, or was this another case of too little, too late? Subscribe for more disturbing true crime cases. Next week, we uncover the baffling disappearance of Phoenix Caldog, a young woman who vanished in broad daylight, with her car still running, and no witnesses in sight.